The United States is at war with Iran right now. Bombs have been falling since February 28th. The US president went on camera and said Iran has no navy, no air force, no radar, and no air defense. Just about everything knocked out. So the question is simple. What does Iran have left to stop a US ground invasion? This is every weapon system in their arsenal. What survived, what didn't, and whether any of it matters if American boots hit the ground. We start with tanks, Karar. Iran looked at every tank they had inherited, captured, or bought over 40 years of conflict and sanctions, and decided to build their most advanced indigenous platform yet. Starting from a T-72 foundation, the Karar adds domestic fire control systems, explosive reactive armor, and a laser warning system that alerts the crew the moment someone designates them for a strike. It is the product of an engineering program that had to solve problems most defense industries never face because they can simply place an order, T-72S. Iran bought these during the darkest years of the war with Iraq, when the front lines were consuming armor faster than anyone could replace it, and they kept buying after the war ended, because a military that came within reach of losing its entire tank force does not stop building one. The T-72S was the export variant, which meant the Soviets held back some of the better systems for their own crews. Iran accepted those terms, and then spent the next 4 decades turning what they received into something the original specification never anticipated. T-72, Z-Sapphire 74. The Gulf War changed how every military on Earth thought about armored warfare. Iranian engineers studied the same footage everyone else did and drew their own conclusions about what needed to change. The Sapphire 74 is the result of that analysis applied domestically, taking T-55 family hulls and upgrading them with improved fire control, better armor configurations, and modifications, developed entirely inside the Iranian defense industry. The gap they were trying to close was real. So was the effort. Zulfikar. 3 variants over 15 years. Each one refining the answer to a question Iranian engineers were asking themselves. What does a tank built for Iranian terrain, Iranian doctrine, and Iranian logistics actually look like? Drawing on components from Soviet T-72 and American M48 and M60 platforms, the program synthesized those influences into something distinctly Iranian. It taught an entire generation of armor designers how to run a main battle tank program without foreign technical support. The tanks that came out of it are the proof that the lesson took. M60A1 SAMSAM. The Shah's military was one of the best equipped in the region, and the M60 patent was part of that investment. After 1979, the supply chain closed completely, and Iranian crews and engineers found themselves responsible for keeping American tanks running with no American support whatsoever. What they built in response was a domestic upgrade program that replaced the original fire control, added new armor packages, and kept a 1960s platform relevant through 4 decades of isolation. The SAMSAM is what institutional knowledge looks like when there is no other option. Mobarez. The chieftain was a demanding machine, even under ideal conditions. And the conditions after 1979 were not ideal. Britain built it, Iran bought over 1,000 of them, and then every connection to the original manufacturer disappeared overnight. Iranian technicians learned the vehicle from the inside out, manufactured components that no longer existed in any supply catalog, and built an upgrade program called the Mobarez that extended the operational life of a tank the British themselves had already retired. 40 years of that work is sitting in the Iranian inventory right now, untouched by the air campaign. Moving on to infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. BMP-2. In January 1987, Iran launched Operation Karbala 5, one of the largest offensives of the entire Iran-Iraq war. They pushed across the Shatt al-Arab waterway with BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles leading mechanized columns toward Basra. The fighting raged for nearly 2 months and cost both sides tens of thousands of casualties. The BMP was not a perfect vehicle for that terrain or that doctrine, but it put Iranian infantry into the fight with a 30mm autocannon and anti-tank missiles instead of just rifles. And that is a different conversation entirely than what came before it. BMP-1, the older brother, and the age is visible. The 73mm gun is a low-pressure weapon that most militaries retired quietly and without ceremony. The armor stops small arms and makes optimistic assumptions about everything else. Iranian crews know exactly what it is, and they keep using it because the alternative is moving infantry in unarmored trucks, and anyone who has seen what artillery does to an unarmored truck understands why you take the BMP-1 every time. Haidar. When the foreign catalogs stopped arriving, Iranian engineers stopped waiting for them. The Haidar is a BTR-60 hull rebuilt from the ground up with domestic components and a heavy machine gun mount. It is not going to win a comparison test against anything built in the last 20 years. What it is going to do is move a full squad without requiring a foreign export license, a diplomatic relationship, or a phone call that nobody is going to answer. M113, Vietnam soldiers called it the aluminum coffin, and they were not wrong about the aluminum or the coffin part. The armor stops small arms on a good day, and the floor offers limited argument against anything buried in the road. American troops rode on top of it in Vietnam, precisely because sitting inside felt like volunteering. Iran bought thousands of these before the revolution, lost access to every American spare part the day the Shah left, and has been keeping them running on domestically manufactured components for 45 years. At this point, Iranian mechanics probably know this vehicle better than the FMC engineers who designed it, EE-11 Urutu. Brazil made a business decision in the 1980s that most Western governments were not willing to make, which was to keep selling to Iran while the war with Iraq was still running, and the embargo was firmly in place. The Urutu was part of that deal. 6 wheels, amphibious capability, fast on paved roads, and available at a moment when Iran needed armored vehicles badly enough to buy them from anyone who would negotiate, Bora. The decision to build a domestic BMP derivative, rather than keep cannibalizing Soviet hulls, reduced Iran's dependence on foreign supply chains significantly. The Bora reverse engineered the Chinese Type 86 design and incorporated elements including M113 road wheels into the final product, EE-9 Cascavel. Brazil, again, same logic, different platform. A 90mm gun on a 6-wheeled armored car, light enough to actually use speed as its primary defense. The Cascavel fought in actual combat across 3 continents during the Cold War era and earned a reputation for being exactly what it claimed to be, a fast, lethal vehicle for crews willing to shoot first and relocate immediately, Tosan. Iran took the British Scorpion light tank, examined the 76mm gun, and concluded that more was better. The domestic version mounts a 90mm. Most analysts believe only a handful were ever completed, and the program functioned more as a development exercise than a production line, FV-101 Scorpion. During the war with Iraq, Iranian Scorpion crews used the vehicle exactly as the British designed it, running screening operations ahead of heavier armor and using speed to avoid the engagements the thin aluminum hull could not survive. The Shah bought them in the 1970s, the revolution happened, British support disappeared, and the Scorpions kept running. Macron IFV, the BTR-50 was already an old vehicle when Iranian engineers decided to rebuild it into something current. They stripped the hull, rewelded sections, added a 30mm unmanned turret, and designed the result specifically for coastal and amphibious operations along the Persian Gulf coastline. The vehicle that came out of that program shares a chassis with what went in and very little else. Whether that counts as a new vehicle or an extreme modification depends on your definition, and the Iranian defense industry has never been particularly interested in that debate. Sayyad. The IRGC developed its entire operational identity around a style of warfare that involves appearing somewhere unexpected, doing significant damage, and not being there when the response arrives. The Sayyad was built to carry that doctrine on tracks. Machine guns or 2-fan anti-tank missiles on a fast chassis with no illusions about standing and fighting. It is not a tank. It was never supposed to be. It is a platform for crews who have studied 40 years of asymmetric warfare and know exactly what they are doing. 2-fan. The name means storm in Farsi. Iranian engineers chose it for a mine-resistant vehicle with a V-hull blast deflection system built after watching American forces in Iraq learn the same lesson about flat-floored vehicles and buried explosives. The education was expensive for everyone involved. Iran took notes and built their own version, which is either flattering or alarming depending on which side of the wire you are standing on. Fateh Q, light, fast, unarmored, and completely honest about all 3 of those things. Not every vehicle in a modern army needs to fight. Some of them need to get there first, and the Fate Tech was built for exactly that mission. Moving on to engineering and support vehicles. Safir Jeep. Tens of thousands of these light tactical vehicles have been produced since 2008. A reverse-engineered American Jeep, simple enough for a field mechanic to fix with a basic toolbox. Iran uses them for everything from hauling commanders to mounting rocket launchers. In a swarm, quantity has a quality all its own. Nenava, the truck that keeps the front line fed and armed. Thousands of them moving fuel, food, and ammunition across the Iranian plateau. Nobody makes documentaries about logistics trucks. They just make or break every war. Kamazi 43-114. When you need to move artillery, missiles, and equipment that would snap a lighter truck in half, this is what you call. Russia builds them, Iran buys them, and Western sanctions have nothing to say about it. Ares and Ares II. Iran's attempt to stop reverse engineering old American designs and start building their own tactical vehicle from scratch. The Ares II improved on the original, which means someone was actually listening to the guys driving them. Ares III, unveiled in 2023, modular enough to carry air defense systems, command shelters, or anti-tank missiles on the same chassis, and a statement of intent about self-sufficiency, Samandar. A light attack vehicle built for the kind of raid where speed is the only protection you get. The IRGC runs these across deserts and mountain passes where a standard truck would never keep up. Kaviran and Sapir. Simple 4x4 platforms for moving small teams and light weapons across terrain that breaks heavier vehicles. Ranger, a militarized dune buggy for special operations teams that need to hit something and be somewhere else before anyone can respond. Zero protection, maximum speed. Exactly what asymmetric warfare asks for. Moving on to artillery. Iranian mortar family. 5 calibers, 60mm through 160mm. Thousands of tubes distributed across mountains, valleys, and urban positions throughout the country. You cannot find a mortar from the air because it fits in the back of a truck or the hands of 2 soldiers. You cannot destroy the stockpile because it is everywhere. This is the artillery that survives every air campaign in history and starts working the moment boots touch the ground. Fajr 1. 107mm rocket launchers mounted on jeeps, bolted to pickup beds, and hidden in tree lines across the country. The Chinese designed the original and Iran mass-produced it because the math is simple. Cheap rockets fired in large numbers from positions that are gone before the smoke clears do not need to be precise. They need to make the other side stop moving. BM-21 Grad. In 1982, Israeli forces advancing into Lebanon encountered Grad salvos fired by Syrian-backed forces and described the experience in terms that do not appear in most official after-action reports. 40 rockets of 122mm caliber in under 20 seconds turns a defined area into a place where nothing organized survives. Iran has been firing these since the war with Iraq, and the physics have not changed since the Soviets designed them in 1963. Fajr 3. When the target is hardened enough that the smaller rockets bounce off it, Iranian commanders reach for the 240mm version. 12 rockets per salvo, 40km reach, enough explosive weight per round to make the structural engineers who built whatever is at the other end feel personally implicated in what happens next. 2 S-1 Gvozdika. The detail that makes this howitzer interesting is that it swims. A self-propelled artillery piece that can cross a river under its own power without waiting for engineers to construct a bridge means an advancing force does not have to stop at water obstacles, and a defending force cannot count on a river as a barrier. It shoots, relocates before counter-battery radar can process the firing signature, and shows up somewhere else. M109A1 during the worst years of the war with Iraq. Iranian crews were firing American shells from American guns at Soviet guns, firing Soviet shells at Iranian cities. The logistics on both sides were improvised under fire, and the M109 kept working anyway. Iran has been manufacturing its own ammunition and replacement components for this system for 45 years. The guns sitting in Iranian artillery parks right now have probably had every original American component replaced at least once with something built in Isfahan or Tehran. Rod 2. Iranian engineers looked at their aging M109 fleet and decided that depending entirely on a platform they could no longer get parts for was a strategic vulnerability. The Rod 2 is the domestic answer. One 55mm gun on an Iranian designed and built chassis. They called it Persian Thunder, which is either very on brand or slightly on the nose depending on your tolerance for that kind of thing. M107. The crew of an M107 aims the gun by moving the entire vehicle. The gunner gives hand signals to the driver, who watches in the left side mirror and makes steering adjustments until the barrel points where it needs to point. The early production barrels were known to fail after approximately 80 rounds, which is the kind of engineering problem that makes artillerymen philosophical. 1978, Koksan. North Korea designed this as a coastal artillery piece to shell South Korean positions across the DMZ. Then, someone decided to bolt the barrel onto a tank chassis and make it mobile, which solved the problem of it being a fixed target, while creating the problem of it being one of the most awkward vehicles ever built. It does not carry its own ammunition. A dedicated resupply vehicle follows it everywhere, like a caddy at a golf tournament that nobody is enjoying. Iran bought them and used them to shell Iraqi positions across flat desert terrain the weapon was never designed for. It worked anyway. Because 170mm shells are persuasive regardless of the doctrine behind them. Iranian Taud howitzer arsenal. Gerald Bull was a Canadian ballistics genius with a dream of building a gun that could launch satellites into orbit and a willingness to sell his technology to anyone who would fund the research. He sold base bleed shell technology to Iran. He sold to Iraq at the same time. He was not taking sides. He was financing a supergun. In 1990, he was shot 5 times outside his apartment in Brussels, almost certainly by Mossad, because his supergun project for Saddam Hussein had progressed further than anyone was comfortable with. Iran got his technology. 10 gun models from 5 countries. American pieces from the 50s next to Soviet guns from the 80s, next to Chinese copies of Russian designs. Gerald Bull never found out how his work ended up being used. Zelzal. After watching American forces systematically destroy Iraqi Scud infrastructure during Desert Storm, Iran spent a decade building an underground dispersal and storage network specifically designed to make the same thing impossible to repeat. Thousands of these unguided rockets sit in hardened underground facilities across Western Iran. They have no guidance systems. They go where physics says they will go. Against a supply depot or a troop concentration, you do not need a guidance system. You need enough rockets and enough dispersal that no strike campaign can find them all. Fateh 110. In September 2018, 6 of these hit an Iranian Kurdish opposition headquarters in Mehravan, Iraq. During an active conference, eyewitnesses reported the strikes hit the specific building where the leadership was gathered. That level of precision from a road mobile ballistic missile was not supposed to be achievable, and it rewrote how every military in the region assessed Iranian strike capability. Solid fuel, no fueling convoy, almost no launch warning, and a combat record that is no longer theoretical. Israel claims the majority of launchers have been destroyed. Iran is still firing them. That gap between the claim and the launch is the story of this missile. Zulfahar, the Fateh grown up, stretched to 700-kilometer range, and given the legs to reach targets across multiple international borders without the launcher leaving Iranian territory. In 2017, 6 of them hit positions in eastern Syria as retaliation for a terrorist attack in Tehran. In 2020, Iran fired them at Ain al-Assad air base in Iraq hours after the killing of Qasem Soleimani. The combat record is established. Whether the current stockpile survived the opening salvos is the part nobody is confirming. Shahab 3, the missile that changed the strategic map of the Middle East. Before the Shahab 3, Iran's ballistic missile threat ended well short of Israel. After it, Tel Aviv was inside the envelope, and every defense budget in the region adjusted accordingly. The liquid fuel requirement means hours of preparation and a launch signature that satellites can detect, which makes it vulnerable to a first strike campaign. Sedjil and Sedjil 2. The entire problem with liquid fuel missiles is the fueling convoy. Satellites spot it. Planners track it. Strike packages launch before the missile does. Solid fuel eliminates that window entirely. The Sedjil sits on a mobile launcher ready to fire with no preparation visible from orbit, reaches 2,000 kilometers, and gives the other side almost no decision time. Khorramshahr, North Korean-derived 2,000-kilometer range, and a nose cone wide enough to carry a payload that no official Iranian statement has ever directly described. Intelligence analysts do not need an official statement. The dimensions tell the story. HY-2 Silkworm. A slow Chinese anti-ship missile from the 1980s that most modern naval air defense systems can engage without breaking a sweat. Iran was never planning to fire one. The plan, positioned along the Strait of Hormuz, was always to fire enough of them simultaneously that the math stops working in the defender's favor, nor. In July 2006, a Hezbollah crew, trained by Iran and operating an Iranian-built Noor derivative, fired at the INS Hanit off the Lebanese coast. The corvette was not operating its missile defense system because the crew believed they were outside the threat envelope. The missile hit, killed 4 sailors, and nearly sank the ship. Iran had transferred not just the weapon, but the training and the doctrine to a non-state actor well enough that they could execute a precision naval strike against a modern warship. Every navy in the region rewrote its threat assessment the following week, COSAR 1, 2, and 3. 3 successive generations of Iranian engineers improving on what the Noor started. Better guidance, more reliable electronics, refined terminal seekers. The institutional knowledge of how to use them is not stored in a facility that airstrikes can reach. Khalij Fars, the conventional approach to anti-ship missiles is to fly low and fast under the radar until the last possible moment. The Khalij Fars does the opposite. It climbs, arcs over the target, and drops onto the deck from above at 4 times the speed of sound. The deck armor of a warship is the thinnest armor on the vessel because naval architects have historically not needed to worry about threats arriving vertically. Built on a Fateh 110 body with an electro-optical seeker that finds the ship during terminal descent, an extraordinarily difficult engagement geometry to execute. If it works, the ship does not get a second opinion. Abu Mahdi, named after the Iraqi militia commander killed alongside Qasem Soleimani in the American drone strike at Baghdad airport in January 2020. Iran builds weapons and names them after the people they are intended to avenge, designed to hunt carrier groups from beyond 1,000 kilometers using waypoint navigation that flies unpredictable paths specifically to bypass the defensive envelope of a carrier strike group. 1,000 kilometers is well outside the Persian Gulf. Moving on to air defense. This is the section the president was talking about. Here is what the record actually shows. Bavar 373, when Russia canceled the S-300 contract in 2010 under international pressure, Ayatollah Khamenei did not go back to the negotiating table. He walked into the defense ministry and ordered them to build one. The result took a decade and cost more than the original Russian contract would have, but it answers to no foreign government and uses phased array radar with Sayad, 4 missiles that Iran claims can track stealth aircraft from beyond their borders. Phase 1 of the strikes hit it directly, and the argument right now is how much of the network is still functioning. S-300, PMU-2. Russia finally delivered these batteries in 2016. After years of broken contracts and diplomatic delays, and Iran integrated them as the premium layer of the entire network. Legitimate Russian hardware, not a copy, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously at 200 kilometers. They were the first thing on the target list when the bombs started falling, which is exactly what happens when you field the most capable system in the inventory, Talash. Iran built batteries of this system and deliberately spread them across the country rather than concentrating them at predictable sites. That decision was a direct lesson drawn from watching what happened to Iraq's centralized air defense in Desert Storm, and then watching Yugoslavia's distributed network survive long enough in 1999 to shoot down an F-117 stealth bomber that was not supposed to be shootable. Iran studied that outcome. The distribution is why this system has more surviving batteries than the concentrated Russian hardware above it, Sayed and Khordad family. In June 2019, Iran's 3rd Khordad air defense system shot a United States Navy RQ-4 Global Hawk out of the sky at 60,000 feet over the Strait of Hormuz. The Global Hawk costs over $200 million and operates at altitudes specifically chosen to stay above most surface-to-air missile threats. The 3rd Khordad engaged it anyway. In the current war, the broader Sayad and Khordad family has confirmed kills on 12 MQ-9 Reapers. Then on March 19th, something in the Iranian air defense network put shrapnel into an F-35A Lightning II over Iran. The pilot brought the aircraft down safely, but it was the first confirmed combat hit on a 5th-generation stealth fighter in the history of aviation. Analysts are still debating which system made the shot. The president said Iranian air defense was gone. Somebody forgot to tell the missile that found the F-35, S-200. Soviet engineers designed this in the 1960s to kill slow, high-flying bombers on predictable Cold War strike profiles. The 300-kilometer reach is real, and it remains the longest range system in what survives of the network. But its ability to engage modern aircraft with advanced electronic warfare is limited. Arman. Iran unveiled this mobile anti-ballistic missile system without the kind of technical detail that would allow outside analysts to fully assess it, which is either evidence of genuine capability being protected or a program that is not quite what the press release says. What is not ambiguous is why it exists. A country that spent 30 years building ballistic missiles understands better than most what it means to be on the receiving end of one. Rod and Cordad 3. Hundreds of batteries distributed nationwide, covering the altitudes and distances where aircraft actually operate. The United States deployed EA-18 Growler electronic warfare aircraft, specifically to suppress this layer of the network, which is a backhanded compliment. You do not send dedicated electronic warfare jets against an air defense system that does not exist. The top layers took the heaviest strikes. This middle layer, with its numbers and its distribution, is what is holding whatever remains of the network together. Mirsad, the Shah bought American Hawk missiles in the 1970s, and Iranian crews shot down at least 40 Iraqi aircraft with them during the war, including 9 in a single day. After the revolution, the American supply chain closed completely, and Iran spent the next 4 decades keeping a system running that Washington designed to be maintained only by American contractors. The Mirsad is the upgraded domestic version, with locally produced missiles on the same American framework. Enough batteries remain distributed across the country that the coverage does not disappear even when individual sites go dark. MIM-23 Hawk. When Iranian engineers ran out of the specialized Phoenix missiles their F-14 Tomcats were designed to carry, they modified ground-based Hawk batteries to fire from the wings of the aircraft under a program called Project Sejal. Strapping a surface-to-air missile onto a fighter and making it work is not something any manual covers. Iran made it work anyway, which tells you something about what they are willing to attempt when the alternative is losing a capability entirely. 2K-12 Kub, a Soviet medium-range system from the 1960s that most modern pilots do not lose sleep over. That comfort is probably earned against a crew operating with incomplete information in an unfamiliar system. It is less earned against a crew that has been running the same equipment for 30 years and knows every limitation by instinct. Old missiles still fly. Yazara 3. The logic of layered air defense is that every layer makes the one above it more effective by forcing a choice. Stay high and the long-range missiles have a clean shot. Come low to avoid the long-range missiles, and the low-altitude systems are waiting. The Yazara 3 is the layer that turns low-altitude penetration from a free move into a calculated risk. HERS 9. Close-in protection for the facilities that cannot take a hit. A reverse-engineered Chinese system at the final layer of defense when everything above it has been exhausted. The range is short, and the engagement window is seconds. That is exactly the scenario it was built for. Rapier. Iranian crews claimed more aircraft kills with these during the war with Iraq than British crews managed with the same system in the Falklands, which either says something impressive about Iranian training or something complicated about the Falklands, possibly both. Tor. In January 2020, an Iranian Tor crew on high alert following the killing of Qasem Soleimani shot down Ukraine International Airlines flight 7:52 minutes after takeoff from Tehran. All 176 people aboard were killed. The crew identified the aircraft as a threat in the darkness and tension of that moment and engaged. The missile worked exactly as designed. Iran initially denied responsibility and then acknowledged it after satellite imagery and flight data made denial impossible. Iranian Missile family. Shoulder-fired missiles exist at the individual soldier level, which means they exist everywhere the Iranian military exists. No airstrike finds them because they are not at a fixed installation. No strike campaign eliminates them because you cannot put a Tomahawk through a system that fits in a backpack and moves with the infantry. Every ridgeline and rooftop in western Iran is a potential launch point, and that was true before this war started. Sohail. Iran looked at these single-shot manpads and decided 4 barrels were more persuasive than 1. The Sohail mounts 4 Misa missiles on a single platform and fires them in ripple. That is not a warning to a low-flying aircraft. It is a problem that countermeasures have to solve 4 times simultaneously. Qayyam. Attack helicopters survive by using terrain as cover, hovering behind ridgelines and rising briefly to fire before disappearing again. The Qaem was built specifically for that threat, geometry with 8 kilometers of reach, designed to engage a helicopter that thinks the hill it is hiding behind is protection, ZU-23-2. A twin 23mm gun that fits on the back of a pickup truck costs a fraction of any missile system and has been shooting down low-flying aircraft and drones on every continent since the 1960s. In a war where Iran has already put 12 Reapers on the ground, this is the gun covering the low-altitude end of that problem. Cheap enough to be everywhere, lethal enough to matter. Samovat, the Iranian version of the Swiss Oerlikon 35mm autocannon, often paired with radar fire control. The 35mm round carries enough mass to reliably destroy a drone without requiring the engagement logic of a guided missile. A cost-effective answer to a target category that does not justify burning a SAM on ZSU-57-2, twin 57mm guns on a tracked chassis from the Cold War. The sensors are basic and the targeting is not automated the way modern systems are. What the 57mm round offers is authority. A hit from this caliber does not leave much to analyze in the wreckage. ZSU-23-4 Shilka. 4 radar, guided 23mm barrels on a tracked chassis, built to keep pace with Soviet armored columns and protect them from NATO close air support. The radar acquisition system is old enough that modern electronic warfare can degrade it, but putting a high rate of fire radar guided gun on something that moves with the armor is a sound concept regardless of the vintage. Mesbah 1, positioned at the sites that absorb the most targeting attention. The crew that operates it knows they're the last thing standing between an incoming weapon and whatever it is aimed at, and the engagement window when that moment arrives is measured in seconds. Sair KS-19. Iranian engineers modernized the fire control on a 100mm anti-aircraft gun that was already considered legacy hardware when Iran first received it. 8 kilometers of effective range and a shell heavy enough to cause serious structural damage does not become less true because the mount is old. In Iranian air defense, the retirement threshold has always been higher than anywhere else. Moving on to attack aircraft. This is where the president's claim has the most truth in it. F-4 Phantom II. Iran flew these on some of the most audacious strike missions of the Iran-Iraq War. In 1981, 8 Phantoms flew nearly 1,000 kilometers to destroy Iraqi bombers at the H-3 airbase deep inside Iraqi territory. One of the longest strike missions in Middle Eastern aviation history. That legacy ended on a runway. Confirmed losses on the ground at Tabriz and Avaz in the first week of strikes. The jets that survived are the ones that were not sitting on the tarmac when the targeting solutions were ready. F-5 Tiger II. Built to be simple, affordable, and operable without a massive support infrastructure, which made it ideal for a military cutoff from its supplier. Iran reverse-engineered parts that no longer existed in any catalog and kept these flying through decades of sanctions. Confirmed losses at the same bases as the Phantoms. The fleet that remains is dispersed. Whether dispersed means operational is the question nobody is answering. F-14 Tomcat. On March 7th and 8th, Israeli strikes hit the 8th Tactical Air Base in Isfahan, the home of Iran's entire Tomcat fleet. Satellite imagery confirmed multiple F-14S destroyed on the ground. One post-strike photograph shows nothing where an aircraft had been except a scorch mark on the tarmac. The IDF explicitly announced it had targeted the F-14S. There is a wrinkle. Analyst Tom Cooper, one of the foremost experts on Iranian military aviation, says some of what Israel showed as destroyed Tomcats were wooden decoys that had not moved from the same spot in years. The honest accounting is that nobody knows exactly how many were operational when the war began. Estimates before the strikes ranged from 1 flyable aircraft to maybe 10. A retired American Navy commander who flew Tomcats for 2 decades watched the satellite imagery coming out of Isfahan and said he was filled with sadness at their demise. Whatever the number was going in, it is lower now. The era of the last flying Tomcat on Earth may be over. MiG-29, Iran's most capable remaining dogfighter and the platform nobody can currently account for. Since the war began, the MiG-29s have disappeared from field of view entirely. No confirmed losses, no confirmed sightings, no confirmed anything. Either they were dispersed to hidden locations before the strikes began, or they are gone and nobody has confirmed it yet. The silence is its own kind of answer, and nobody knows which answer it is. Su-24. On March 2nd, 2 Iranian Su-24S took off and tried to conduct a strike mission against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, home to the largest American airbase in the Middle East. Qatari F-15S intercepted them and shot them down before they reached the target. It was the most significant air-to-air engagement involving Iranian aircraft in the entire war. And it ended in about the way anyone paying attention would have predicted. The aircraft that did not fly that mission were caught on the ground at Shiraz and Ahvaz. J-7, a Chinese-built MiG-21 derivative used for point defense and border intercept. Satellite imagery from Isfahan confirmed multiple aircraft destroyed along the taxiways in the same strikes that hit the Tomcats. Not a platform anyone was counting on to change the outcome of a modern air war. Another hole in the order of battle. Yak-130. On March 4th, an Israeli F-35 shot one down over Tehran in the first air-to-air engagement between a fifth-generation fighter and a manned aircraft in this war. The IDF posted footage. Additional airframes were destroyed on the ground at Ahvaz. An aircraft that Iran was using primarily as an advanced trainer ended up in the history books for the wrong reason: Seke, Kosar, and Azarakhsh. Iran's domestically built fighters exist in small numbers and were never going to reshape the air war. No confirmed losses. The point of these aircraft was never the performance. It was proving that Iran could design and build its own combat aircraft without asking anyone's permission, and that remains true regardless of what happened to everything else on this list. Moving on to support aircraft. C-130 Hercules. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian crews turned these tactical transports into improvised bombers by rolling ordnance out the rear cargo ramp at altitude and hoping physics did the rest. It was exactly the kind of solution Iran reaches for when the right tool is not available and the wrong tool is all there is. 2 were confirmed destroyed on the ground at Shiraz on March 2nd, and a third was confirmed destroyed at Kerman on March 12th when CENTCOM released footage of the strike. An air force running on reverse-engineered parts and cannibalized airframes for 45 years cannot easily replace what it loses on a runway. Il-76. Iraqi pilots flew these across the border in 1991 to escape coalition bombs, and Tehran simply kept them as war reparations, inheriting strategic airlift capable of moving armored vehicles and large missile components in a single flight without ever placing an order or signing a contract. 1 was destroyed at Shiraz. 3 more were confirmed destroyed at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran, and another went at Kerman. Out of a fleet of roughly a dozen, losing that many in 2 weeks is not a number. An air force under total sanctions recovers from easily. Fokker F-27. Simple, proven, and older than most of the pilots who flew them. These twin-engine turboprops had been connecting Iranian Air Force bases since the 1960s. 2 were confirmed destroyed on the ground at Ahvaz. PC-6 Porter. Swiss engineers built this short takeoff and landing aircraft to operate from mountain ledges and dirt tracks that would destroy anything heavier. And in a country defined by the Zagros and Alborz ranges, that capability is what keeps isolated border positions connected to the rest of the command. Iran 140. What began as a flagship domestic aviation program, built with Ukrainian help and significant national investment, became a cautionary tale about what sanctions do to an aircraft manufacturing program over time. After a series of high-profile crashes grounded most of the fleet, the program never fully recovered, and the airframes that remain in service are rare and troubled. In '74, Ukrainian engineers designed this transport specifically for the worst airfields on Earth, mounting the engines above the wings to keep them clear of debris thrown up from unprepared strips. 3 were confirmed destroyed at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran on March 7th, built for extreme conditions and lost on a concrete apron. Boeing 747. The aircraft that burned at Mehrabad on March 6th was 55 years old. Originally ordered by Eastern Airlines, it was delivered instead to Trans World Airlines in 1971, returned to Boeing in 1975, and converted into an aerial refueling tanker for the Shah's Air Force. It survived the revolution, survived 4 decades of sanctions, and survived long enough to become the last Boeing 747-100 series still flying anywhere on Earth before an Israeli airstrike found it on the tarmac. 2 more 747s were destroyed alongside it that same night, and whatever remained of Iran's ability to refuel its fighter fleet at strategic range went with them. Falcon 20, moving senior officials and sensitive teams across the region without attracting the attention a military transport would draw. These French business jets operate on the principle that the most important aircraft is sometimes the one nobody is watching. P-3 Orion. 40 years without American support, and these maritime patrol aircraft were still flying, carrying a magnetic anomaly detector boom in the tail designed to find submarines by the disturbance their metal hulls create in the Earth's magnetic field. CENTCOM released footage of one being destroyed at Kerman Airport on March 12th. With only a handful in the fleet before the war began, one strike removed a significant portion of Iran's maritime surveillance capability in a single pass. Boeing 707. With only a small number of these aerial refueling tankers operational before the war began, losing two of them at Mehrabad on the same night as the 747 strikes meant that Iran's entire strategic refueling architecture, the system that kept fighters in the air beyond their internal fuel range, was effectively dismantled before most of the world had finished reading the first week's headlines. Moving on to helicopters. AH-1J Cobra. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iranian crews achieved a 10-to-1 kill ratio against Iraqi armor with these aircraft, and fought what historians documented as the first helicopter versus helicopter dogfights in recorded military history, engaging Iraqi Hinds in engagements that neither side had doctrine for because nobody had fought that way before. The airframe is decades past what any Western military would consider a service life, and Iranian crews know every hour on it because they have spent 40 years keeping it alive without a single American spare part. CH-47, Chinook, moving a howitzer over a mountain range, repositioning an entire platoon to a position that has no road access, supplying a forward base that sits above the range of wheeled logistics. These are the missions that nothing else in the Iranian rotary wing fleet can perform. And in a country defined by the Zagros and Alborz ranges, those missions come up constantly. Bell 214. Built specifically for hot and high conditions by engineers who understood that lifting real loads at altitude in thin air requires a different approach than standard utility helicopter design. This platform became the aircraft Iranian commanders reach for when the mountain is too high and the margin for error is too small. Known locally as the Isfahan, it has outlasted every expectation of its service life because nothing available to replace it can do the same job in the same terrain. Bell UH-1N Twin Huey. In May 2024, President Raisi died when one of these went down in fog in the northern mountains. And the crash forced a public reckoning with what it means to keep 1960s-era machines in frontline service for 5 decades past their original design assumptions. Every helicopter fleet ages. Not every country has to keep flying them anyway. Me-17. One confirmed destroyed on the ground at Sanandaj by an Israeli airstrike. A Bell 214 was confirmed destroyed at the same base on March 18th in a follow-up strike. Sanandaj sits in Kurdistan province in western Iran, close enough to the Iraqi border that it has been a logistics hub for decades, which is exactly why it was targeted twice. Augusta Bell 206. Quietly and without ceremony, this light utility helicopter became the foundation of everything Iran built in its own rotary wing program. The engineers who learned this airframe are the engineers who designed the Tufan and the Shahed 278, which means a helicopter that was never supposed to be a military technology program ended up being the most consequential aircraft Iran ever received. IAIO Tufan. When the Cobra fleet started aging beyond what the supply chain could support, Iranian engineers built their own version rather than accept the loss of attack helicopter capability entirely. Not a clean sheet design and not a competitor to anything currently in production anywhere else, but a domestically maintained attack platform that keeps Iranian pilots current in rotary wing close support at a time when the alternative was letting the capability go dark. Hessa Shahed 278, a composite body helicopter derived from the Bell 206, produced entirely in Iranian facilities without foreign support. The significance is not the performance specifications. The significance is the supply chain, the tooling, the trained workforce, and the institutional knowledge that makes future programs possible. Iran built this one themselves, which means the next one will be easier. Me-28 NE Night Hunter. Recently delivered from Russia and representing the largest capability jump the Iranian helicopter fleet has seen in decades, the Night Hunter carries a mast-mounted millimeter wave radar and a 30mm cannon that nothing else in the Iranian rotary inventory matches. modern enough that its combat potential has not yet been tested in this war, and no confirmed losses to report. Hessa Shahed 285, a single-seat light attack helicopter built off a scout airframe, not designed to survive a sophisticated air defense environment, but designed to be a persistent, armed presence at the edges of the battlefield where a ground force has to account for it. Small, cheap to operate, and difficult to justify spending a missile on. In an asymmetric war, those are not weaknesses. Moving on to unmanned aerial vehicles, Shahed 136, Arash, and Rod 85. These one-way attack drones have made this war expensive for everyone in the region in ways that no amount of CENTCOM strike claims fully accounts for. CENTCOM confirms 66% of production facilities have been damaged or destroyed, which means roughly a third of the manufacturing capacity is still running, and Iran has already fired approximately 2,000 of them since February 28th. The line between degraded production and enough production is a question the next few weeks will answer, and the answer matters more than almost anything else on this list. Mohajer 1 through 5. Since the 1980s, this reconnaissance series has been the eyes of the Iranian military, evolving from crude rail launched scouts during the Iran-Iraq War into a family of intelligence platforms capable of covering everything from short-range border patrol to theater-level surveillance. The platform that started as a simple observation tool has had 40 years of iteration behind it, and 40 years of iteration tends to produce something that works. Yasir. After Iranian forces captured an American ScanEagle drone in 2012, engineers went to work on a domestic version using the captured hardware as the baseline. The result is a small catapult-launched platform with long endurance that needs no runway and asks no foreign government for permission to fly. For Iran, any Western hardware that lands intact has always been the prototype for the next domestic production run. Mohajer 6, the hunter-killer of the family, carries precision-guided munitions, provides real-time laser targeting for ground units, and operates from short, rough airstrips that larger platforms could never use. When Iranian commanders need an armed eye overhead and need a decision made in minutes rather than hours, this is the aircraft they call for, Saigeh and Shahed 191. When an American RQ-170 stealth drone came down in Iranian territory in 2011, Tehran did not return it. Iranian engineers spent years studying every surface angle, every materials choice, every design decision embedded in one of the most sensitive stealth aircraft the United States had ever built, and then put their own version into production. Some variants carry weapons in internal bays to preserve the low radar profile that makes the whole concept worth pursuing in the first place. Shahed 129, thousands of combat hours in Syria, dropping its own ordnance or guiding in heavier strikes, staying airborne for a full day at a time. This is the most recognizable combat drone in the Iranian inventory and the platform that taught the IRGC how to integrate unmanned systems into conventional military operations at scale. Hamaseh. When commanders need more persistent coverage than a scout provides, but do not want to risk a larger strategic asset over a contested area, this twin-boom tactical platform fills the gap, built for both surveillance and light strike work, with a sensor nose designed to accept different payloads depending on the mission. H1-10 Sarir. An unusual twin-engine push-pull configuration gives this platform the lift and reliability needed to carry light heat-seeking missiles for air-to-air engagements against other drones or low-flying helicopters, which makes it something genuinely rare in any inventory, a drone built specifically to kill other drones. Shahed 149 Gaza. Named as a deliberate political statement, this heavy striker is modeled on the American MQ-9 Reaper in both form and ambition, carrying a significant payload at altitude for 35 hours at a time and giving Iran a long-reach strategic strike capability that was previously only available to a handful of the world's most advanced air forces. Fotros, one of the largest platforms in the Iranian inventory, designed for strategic surveillance and long-range strike missions that keep it airborne for more than 24 hours, watching entire maritime zones from a single continuous flight. Mohajer 10, unveiled in 2023 with significantly increased payload capacity and extended range, the newest evolution of the family represents the current direction of Iranian drone development. Heavier, more capable, and built around the assumption that unmanned systems will carry an increasing share of the strike mission going forward. Shahed 171 Simorgh, Where the Sege is a scaled-down interpretation of the captured RQ-170, the Simorgh is the full-scale, jet-powered version, a large flying wing built for strategic reconnaissance in environments where a conventional drone would be too easily detected and too easily killed. Karar. Launched by rocket booster and needing no runway, this high-speed jet-powered drone does double duty as an air defense target and an armed one-way attack platform in its later variants, making it unpredictable in a way that runway-dependent systems never are. Common 22. A long, narrow wing optimized for high-altitude persistence, built to carry electronic warfare equipment or precision-guided bombs for a full day on a single mission, giving the regular Iranian Air Force its own version of the kind of persistent overhead presence that was once the exclusive province of the world's largest defense budgets. Safre Mahi. A flat diamond-shaped stealth drone still working through development. The goal is a platform whose body geometry scatters radar returns in the same way the most advanced stealth aircraft in the world do. Not operational yet, but the fact that Iran is pursuing it at all tells you where the program is headed. Ababil. Simple, rugged, and exported to armed groups across the Middle East for decades. The Ababil is the foundation of the Iranian drone philosophy in its purest form. Keep it cheap, keep it simple, and field enough of them that the math works in your favor regardless of what the other side spends on interceptors. Nazir, Ra'ad, Hodhod, and Mirage 532. These squad-level scouts launch from a vehicle or a hilltop and stream video to a tablet in the hands of the team leader who ordered the flight, letting infantry see what is waiting on the other side of the ridge before committing anyone to find out the hard way. No air campaign reaches them because they live in the hands of the infantry, and the infantry is still there. Moving on to naval vessels. The president said Iran has no navy. Here is what the record actually shows. Kilo class. Russian engineers designed these diesel-electric submarines to be so acoustically quiet that NATO nicknamed the class the Black Hole. The Iris Tarik, hull 901, was confirmed sunk by US forces on March 13th. The other two boats, the Nu and the Yunez, were in refit when the war started, which means they were either caught in dry dock or survived because they were already off the water. Nobody is confirming which Fateh class. Nearly a decade of domestic engineering produced this coastal submarine, the first Iranian-designed boat capable of staying submerged without a snorkel for extended periods using air-independent propulsion. It sits in the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, and at least one has been reported damaged and likely mission killed, though the full picture has not been confirmed publicly. Ghadar class. North Korean blueprints. Iranian production, small enough to sit motionless on the rocky seabed and wait like a mine that can think. 11 of roughly 20 have been confirmed destroyed, and the ones that survived are still out there. In the cluttered, shallow water of the Persian Gulf, traditional sonar often cannot tell the difference between a Ghadir and a pile of rocks. Losing more than half a midget submarine fleet and still having the other half in the water is not elimination, it is reduction, Nahang class. Built entirely under arms embargo as a proof of concept, this single double-hulled midget submarine was designed for inserting special operations teams and laying mines in shallow harbors. Every submarine that came after it exists because Iranian engineers learned here first that it was possible to build one without foreign help. Muj class. This is the passage that answers the question of whether Iran still has a navy. When Operation Epic Fury began, 4 domestically built frigates were in this class. Within 1 week, 3 of them were gone. The Iris Jumran was destroyed at Konarak Naval Base. The Iris Sahan was destroyed at Bandar Abbas. The Iris Dina had just attended India's International Fleet Review, a multinational gathering of 86 warships from 74 nations, where the Iranian Navy commander had met India's Chief of Naval Staff days before the war started. Transiting international waters on the way home, the ship was hit by a single Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo fired by USS Charlotte, a Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine. The Dina sank in 2 to 3 minutes. 87 bodies were recovered, 32 sailors survived. The rest remained missing. It was the first time a US submarine had sunk an enemy warship with a torpedo since World War II, and the first submarine kill of any kind since HMS Conqueror put a torpedo into the Argentine cruiser Ara General Belgrano during the Falklands War in 1982. The fourth ship of the class, the Iris Delaman, is stationed in the Caspian Sea and geographically isolated from the fight. Iran's most capable domestically built frigate line was functionally eliminated in under a week, Alvin class. During Operation Praying Mantis, in 1988, an American pilot dropped a laser-guided bomb directly down the Iris Sabalan's exhaust stack, and the Iranian Navy still refused to scrap it. They spent years rebuilding the ship and returned it to service as a statement about what this fleet does when it takes a hit. Multiple ships from this class were reportedly struck at Konarak Naval Base during Epic Fury, and the damage to the base itself is confirmed in satellite imagery even where individual losses remain uncertain, by Andor class. 60 years of continuous service on American-built hulls kept operational through 6 decades of sanctions by replacing the original electronics with Chinese systems and domestic modifications, still participating in exercises with Russian and Chinese navies in the months before this war began. Reportedly struck during the campaign with losses unverified. Hamzeh class, originally delivered to the Shah as a government yacht, the revolutionary government stripped out the wood paneling and turned it into a Caspian Sea warship. Geography has kept it out of this conflict in a way that no amount of armor could have managed, which is the one advantage of being stationed on a landlocked sea, Kaman class. French designers built these fast attack craft for the mission that destroyed most of the Iraqi Navy in a single day during the 1980s. Dash from a hidden cove, put a missile into something important, and disappear before the response arrives. Small, fast, and armed with anti-ship missiles disproportionate to their size. Sina class. Iranian shipyards spent a decade replacing the aging French Kaman boats with a domestic evolution of the same design, carrying the Noor anti-ship missile on a hull built without a foreign contract, a foreign engineer, or a foreign signature on anything. The fast attack mission stays the same. The supply chain answers to nobody outside Iran. Iranian patrol boat fleet. Stopping, boarding, monitoring, and harassing traffic through Iranian waters is the daily work of the Parvin and Kaivan class vessels. And it is not the work of a fleet engagement. Being everywhere at once is a harder problem to eliminate than a warship sitting at a pier, which is why these boats keep showing up in every incident report regardless of what is happening to the larger fleet. IRGC Navy Fleet. By mid-March, CENTCOM reported over 100 Iranian naval vessels destroyed, and the number kept climbing. What the count does not capture is the nature of what is being destroyed. Most of the losses are speedboats and fast patrol craft, and the ones doing the most operational damage in this war, mining the strait, attacking tankers, launching drone strikes from the water, are not the vessels that appear on any formal naval registry. The fleet is being attrited. It has not been stopped. Shahin class. Naval mines are among the most cost-effective weapons in the Iranian arsenal, capable of closing the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic and spiking world oil prices without a single warship involved. The only vessel capable of clearing them was in overhaul when the war started, and has not been available since the first shot was fired, which means Iran can lay them and cannot clean them up. Macron class. Satellite imagery from March 2nd showed the Iris Macron on fire at its moorings in Bandar Abbas, confirming the destruction of a ship that had already circumnavigated the globe alongside the Iris Dina between 2022 and 2023 and led deployments as far as the Atlantic. Before it burned, it stood as the most ambitious projection of Iranian naval power ever attempted. The newly commissioned Iris Kurdistan, a second expeditionary sea base that entered service in 2025, has no confirmed losses reported. Iris Shahid Bagheri, commissioned in February 2025 after 2 years of converting a container ship into a platform capable of launching Shahed series drones and operating helicopters at sea, this IRGC drone carrier entered service less than 2 weeks before the war began. Destroyed at Bandar Abbas in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, it never conducted a single combat mission. Iran built something genuinely new and lost it before the world fully understood what it could do. Iranian support and logistics fleet, replenishment ships, tenders, amphibious landing vessels, the infrastructure that keeps the fighting fleet at sea and puts troops on hostile shores when the mission requires it. Moving on to small arms and infantry weapons. PC-9 Zoaf, Iran's version of the Sig Sauer P-226, the standard sidearm for officers across the regular army and the IRGC. Swiss-German engineering reproduced in Iranian factories after the supply chain closed, Tandar, Heckler & Koch licensed the MP5 to Iran before the revolution, and Iranian factories have been running the same production line ever since. 5 decades of the world's most famous submachine gun coming out of Iranian workshops, G3A6, West German engineering that defined the Iranian infantry for half a century. The 7.62 NATO round punches through brush and brick walls where lighter calibers quit. A generation of Iranian conscripts learned soldiering behind this rifle. Masaf II, the domestic replacement for the G3, built to move the Iranian army into a modular modern platform without changing the cartridge. The same 7.62 round in a rifle designed this century, KLS family, Soviet-designed Kalashnikovs built in Iranian factories. The most common weapon on any Iranian battlefield. Fixed stock for infantry, folding stock for paratroopers and armored crews. Runs in a dust storm without a second thought. AK-133, the IRGC's licensed version of the modern Russian AK-103. Polymer furniture, improved muzzle brake, a direct technological link to the current Russian production line, Sayad 556. An Iranian clone of the Chinese CQ, itself a copy of the American M16. IRGC Special Forces carry these for the higher rate of fire and lighter weight in urban operations. Masaf 1, a piston-driven AR-style carbine for the IRGC units that wanted modern ergonomics without the direct impingement reliability problems. Rail system, adjustable stock, built in Iran. Fateh, a domestically designed assault rifle with a top-mounted charging handle and a boxy, futuristic profile. Rare in the field, but proof that Iranian designers keep experimenting. Nakjir, Iran's copy of the Soviet SVD Dragunov, the designated marksman rifle that extends a squad's reach to 800 meters in the mountain passes and open terrain of the border regions. Siavash, a lightweight, domestically produced bolt-action sniper rifle for units that need precision in a package they can actually carry across the terrain they are defending. Tahir, the Iranian sniper rifle built to reach out 1,200 meters. Simple enough to manufacture numbers, accurate enough to matter at the ranges Iranian infantry actually fights. Hovaza, a copy of the Barrett M82, 50 caliber rounds at targets a mile away with enough energy to disable vehicles and punch through fortified positions. Sayad AM50, Austria sold Steyr HS-50 rifles to the Iranian police in 2005. Within 3 years, Iran had reverse engineered the design. The AM50 has since appeared in nearly every regional conflict as one of Iran's most successful exports. Shaher, 14.5 millimeter, a round originally designed for Soviet anti-tank work, fired from a weapon that looks more like a small cannon than a rifle. 4-kilometer effective range against vehicles, radar dishes, and anything else that needs to stop existing from a distance the shooter cannot be seen from. Arash, 20 millimeter rounds from a shoulder-fired weapon, a caliber that belongs on aircraft and light armored vehicles, somehow made portable. For bunkers and armored personnel carriers at ranges where nothing smaller solves the problem. RPK, the squad automatic weapon of the Iranian infantry. An oversized AK with a longer barrel and a bipod, sharing magazines with every other Kalashnikov in the unit, one soldier providing sustained fire while the rest move. Rheinmetall MGA-3, licensed production of the German MG-3, a direct descendant of the MG-42. Over 1,000 rounds of 7.62 NATO per minute. The sound of it has been described as tearing linoleum, the primary defensive machine gun for Iranian ground units, PKM and PKT. The Soviet general-purpose machine gun that most analysts consider the best in its class. Belt-fed, reliable, simple enough that every soldier across every branch knows how to run it. Iran builds their own. Akbar, 6 rotating barrels firing 7.62 NATO at a rate that creates a curtain of fire rather than a stream of it. Iran's answer to the minigun, usually mounted on a vehicle and used to end an engagement in seconds. W85, a 12.7 millimeter heavy machine gun light, enough for a small team to carry and mount on almost any tactical vehicle. Tears through light armor and keeps enemy infantry at distances where they cannot effectively return fire. MGD 12.7. The Iranian copy of the Soviet Dushka, a weapon that has been hunting light vehicles and low-flying aircraft for over 80 years. Heavy, simple, and devastating. CS LM2A, A more refined Chinese-derived 12.7mm platform filling the same role with updated manufacturing, common on vehicle mounts and static defensive positions across the inventory. Muharrem, the heavy version of the Akbar. 6 barrels, 12.7mm, mounted on patrol boats and heavy trucks. The weapon you reach for when you need to turn a light vehicle into scrap metal immediately. Nasir, a 40mm automatic grenade launcher that combines the area effect of a mortar with the rate of fire of a machine gun, mounted on vehicle roofs for rapid suppression of anything caught in the open. Kaveh 30, the 30mm version. Heavier grenades at longer range for fortified positions that the smaller caliber cannot reach effectively. An infantry cannon for the targets between small arms and artillery. Iranian RPG family, the Fath, Nafez, Zafar, and Sega. 4 domestically produced variants of the rocket-propelled grenade covering anti-armor, anti-personnel, and specialized roles. The most common anti-armor tool at the squad level, and the weapon that has been killing vehicles on every continent since 1961, Tufan 1 through 7. American TOW missiles reached Iran through the Iran-Contra deals of the 1980s and became the blueprints for this family. 7 variants spanning basic-shaped Charge 2, top attack, and thermobaric, the most combat-proven anti-tank missile in the Iranian inventory. Konkurs and Tausen 1. Soviet-designed, wire-guided anti-tank missiles built domestically in Iran. 4-kilometer range, reliable, and mounted on the roofs of armored personnel carriers across the mechanized force. The long-range kill capability that slows an armored advance before it reaches the line, the Lavi. Iran's copy of the Russian Kornet, widely considered one of the most dangerous anti-tank missiles in service anywhere. Laser beam riding, tandem warhead designed specifically to defeat explosive reactive armor. In 2006, Hezbollah used Kornets to penetrate Merkava 4 tanks that Israeli doctrine had assessed as survivable. Iran took note and built their own Almas. After a small number of Israeli spike missiles were captured in 2006, they went straight to Iranian engineers for teardown. The result fires from 8 kilometers, guides itself autonomously, and drops onto the thin roof armor of a tank from above. The operator is already behind cover before it hits, Sege 1 and 2. Iran's copy of the American M47 Dragon, short-range, man-portable, the first layer of the anti-armor net that a ground force walks into at the squad level, ROD. A domestically designed anti-tank guided missile for quick reaction hits against armored columns, part of the layered defense that ensures an invader is under anti-armor fire from the moment they cross the border, Qaim and Qaim-M. Iranian engineers took the Tufan airframe and added laser guidance to create a missile that hunts drones and low-flying helicopters. A squad-level weapon that can swat a Reaper out of the sky without a radar battery. The answer to the question of what happens when the air defense network is degraded, but the infantry is not,